Jeremy, thanks for joining us. Just wondering, do you have any early numbers from the Strip reopening, and what do they look like?
You know, the numbers that we're getting from the Strip's reopening are pretty much anecdotal at the moment. Certainly there's an indication that weekend occupancies are doing pretty well, that a lot of folks have chosen to come to Las Vegas, particularly from Southern California, which is just terrific for us to know that as the economy opened back up, visitors came back to Las Vegas. That having been said, early information would suggest that it's certainly not as favorable during the weekdays, which are important to us. And we know that with convention travel being a little longer to come back, as well as international travel, where people tend to spend a little bit more time, is going to take some time to come back. So I'm certainly excited to see some of the numbers that are coming out and hear some of the stories, but we have a long road to hoe.
What are your concerns when we see these numbers ticking back up, especially in Arizona?
Look, actually, I'm a bit more concerned about what we're seeing in California than I am in Arizona. I mean, there's no doubt that that spike is significant. And I think one of the things that creates a lot of concern is the closing of some of the operations, the casino operations down there, at least augmenting their operating plan. Certainly that doesn't bode well for the type of economy that we have here or there. But more than that, I think the bigger concern is whether or not what we're starting to see is the beginning of another phase of the virus itself, and whether that's going to create some longer run concerns for us overall. Look, I don't want to read too much into some of the early statistics, and certainly we want to keep a much closer eye on things like hospitalizations than we do necessarily just the number of people that are testing positive, for the pure fact that we're just testing more folks, and that's okay. But some of these statistics are pretty daunting, particularly when we look at places like Florida, Texas, Utah, Arizona. Those upticks are important. As I mentioned, one of the biggest concerns that I have is certainly Southern California, seeing some of the upticks in places like Los Angeles. Obviously, that's really important to us as an economy, particularly as we start to open back up. That's where some of the folks are going to come from, and we don't want to lose any of that momentum. That having been said, of course, the overarching concern is certainly the public health out there, and the last thing we want to do is see this virus start to rear its head again.
Have you guys done any kind of projecting forward about what a worst case, best case, likely case scenarios are for an economic recovery here in Las Vegas?
Yeah, we've done quite a bit of that, actually. Certainly the best case scenario is one in which a vaccine or a treatment comes available relatively quickly. We know that there's a lot of folks out there that are really just waiting to feel comfortable about traveling again, about going out again, those type of things. Certainly that would buoy that sector of the economy and really push it forward. It would allow the stimulus that's in the market today to really have done its job and allow the economy to kind of open back up. That feels a little bit unlikely right now, but we'll remain optimistic that some of that can happen. If that is to happen, we think a lot of the jobs that we've lost come back almost immediately. Not all of them. I don't want to leave anyone with that kind of suggestion, but certainly a lot of the jobs will start to come back relatively quickly. That sort of mid-case scenario, the one that we think is most likely, is about a third, and a third. And that is about a third of the jobs will come back online almost immediately. As a matter of fact, John, I'm willing to bet you that many of those jobs are already back in our economy. The next third will follow relatively close behind that. We have almost 70% of all the hotel rooms in Las Vegas back open today, and that's bringing a lot of folks back to work. There's no doubt about that. And so as that starts to gain momentum, those jobs will come back. The one that concerns us in this mid-case scenario is that last third of employees, right? We know that there's some transitional, and structural unemployment we're going to be dealing with in the state for some time to come. And so I'm really concerned about that taking somewhere between 18 months and 24 months to really kind of get back to normal. The worst case scenario is pretty awful to start to think about, right? Difficulty in really being able to adapt to the coronavirus. It becomes a greater problem than scientists or healthcare professionals think that it will be. We lag in terms of being able to find some type of vaccine or treatment. And I think for an economy like ours in Las Vegas, that could be devastating for a very, very long period of time. I don't expect that to happen. I think it's a very unlikely scenario. I feel like we've dealt with viruses before in this country and around the world, and we've done so, again, I wouldn't say successfully, but we've done so in a way that allows the economy to regain its momentum. And so I think that mid-case scenario is the one we're going to stick to, at least for a while. It feels like we're outpacing even that mid-case scenario a bit right now. But John, I think sometimes people kind of forget just how much stimulus is in our economy right now. $2.3 trillion is a whole lot of money that's been added back into the economy. People have some money in their bank accounts and their wallets, and that's sort of buoying everything from grocery sales to other types of retail out in our economy today. Even some of the travel that we're seeing, we know is being buoyed by that. And so that's going to run out in late summer, and I'm concerned about getting to stability before that stimulus runs out.
Do you think the federal government is done handing out stimulus checks?
I think the federal government is in a wait-and-see mode right now. I think what they're doing is seeing how the federal stimulus works, seeing how the economies come back in. Look, when the Federal Reserve Bank came out and said, we are going to do whatever is necessary to keep the economy moving forward, I think that should be a tremendous boost for us overall in understanding there's going to be some increased degree of stability. Do I think it's this other act, the HEROES Act, that's been contemplated, this idea of another $3 trillion worth of stimulus? Look, if the economy goes bad, I think the federal government is going to step up to the plate and stabilize our economy, no matter what it takes. But I don't think we're going to have a better insight into that probably until July, maybe even August, as we see what really happens with the first round of stimulus. Does it wear off? Does the economy start to pick up as we reopen a bit? And what does that really look like? Look, I was very much a fan of the initial stimulus program. I thought it was well designed and got into the hands of consumers very quickly. But we can overdo it too, and I think we've got to be cautious.
The moratorium on evictions and foreclosures ends fairly soon, at the end of this month. How concerned are you about that?
Well, look, I'm very concerned about it. I think when you look at the folks that have the least to lose, they have a tendency to lose the most as the economy drops down. And there's a lot of folks in our community that really don't have deep savings accounts. They don't have the ability to, when they lost their job and maybe didn't get an unemployment check or something along those lines, they don't have a bunch of money sitting in the bank where they can sort of float things like rent or even the mortgage payment that they're making. Look, I think we learned a great number of lessons during the Great Recessions. I think banks and other creditors have been incredibly proactive relative to this and done a really good job on that. But your point, I think, is a very good one. I am very concerned right now about foreclosures, rental assistance, those type of things really being needed in our community today in order to keep it stabilized. Now, look, I also want to be mindful of the other side of the equation. You also have landlords out there that have to make mortgage payments as well. You have banks that are relying on those mortgage payments coming in. Our fiscal system works because people make their payments, not because they don't. And so there's some balancing that really needs to happen here. Look, do I think that we should just flip the switch overnight and essentially have all those foreclosures and evictions start to come down the pipe? No, I don't. But I also think we need to create a system where if people can find a way to make that payment, if we can even provide them some assistance, then we can carry it forward. But we can't do that into perpetuity.
Do you think we'll see the foreclosure crisis that we saw here in 2009 and home prices collapsing?
Yeah, thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I don't think we will at all. I think some of the fundamentals that led to that during 2006, 7, and 8, I mean, you and I were around for that. We remember people taking home equity lines of credit to buy boats or other cars or those type of things. Frankly, that stuff just doesn't happen anymore. Financial institutions have systems put in place where that doesn't happen. As a matter of fact, in the state of Nevada, many of the laws that were passed during the last foreclosure crisis would prevent some similar things like that from happening again. But, do I believe that we could have some instability in our housing market? Do I believe that if this crisis were to continue, that we could see negative or declines in housing prices and instability both in our residential and our commercial real estate markets? You bet I do.
Do you see any other shocks to the economy coming from this, or any other black swans in the pond out there?
Well, that's sort of the definition of the black swan, right? Is that you don't sort of see it coming. It's a really good question. during my career, I've been involved with a handful of these type of crises, right? You had the events after September 11th, you had the foreclosure crisis, you had the Great Recession, and now COVID-19, to say nothing of things like 1 October that really sent a shock to our systems overall. John, I continue to say the same thing. Our economy is resilient and resourceful. We figure a way forward. That said, COVID-19 is a formidable adversary relative to that. It's different than anything that we've ever seen before. It's hitting us economically we haven't seen before. Even if we cut our unemployment rate in half, it's still going to be higher than what it was during the peak of the Great Recession. Look, I really hope there's not another black swan hanging out there that we're just not seeing or something along those lines, but there will be something else at some point in time. What we have to do is make sure that our resolve is unwavering and that we continue to press through this, as difficult as it's going to be.
Jeremy Aguerro, thank you again for joining us and kind of giving us your insight. And I'm sure we'll want to circle around with you again in the near future.
Yeah, thank you for everything you do, and whatever you need, you just let me know. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you, Jeremy.